Greetings and welcome to the church-based Marketplace Ministry course, where we will be exploring the need for a marketplace ministry in every local church. We're so thankful that you could join us, and we look forward to having some time together to explore the idea of a theology of work with you, the idea of how it is that we can be the church every day of the week. One of the things that we believe is that the purpose of Sunday is Monday. And when we think about that, it can lead to all sorts of questions and dialogue. And so we look forward to having you with us on this journey, and we hope that it is a rich and fulfilling time for you. My name is Renita Reed Thompson, and I've kind of got a confusing history. So let me tell you that I am a Dutch Canadian, American, Liberian, Ghanaian, Kenyan citizen, but ultimately I'm a citizen of heaven, and that is where I am going. I am not a pastor, but I am the daughter of a pastor and the sister of a pastor and the wife of a pastor. And but I come to you to in front of thousands of business interviews that I have conducted over the years to help bring the story, the message that business owners who are Christians have been telling me over the years, and be able to relay with my voice, their voice, of what they have been saying. I'm married to Michael. We have, together we have 4 children and 2 weddings going on, and so we're excited about that. I am the youngest daughter of 5 children, and my first degree is in psychology and social work. My second degree is an MBA, and my third is in sustainable development, my PhD. And so I come bringing some knowledge and information, especially after working in business development in West Africa and in East Africa. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, the perspective that I'm bringing. And what I want to do is to share with you, after doing business development in West Africa for 7 years, I saw very good growth. I saw businesses growing. I saw wealth being created. I saw jobs being created. And this was a very exciting thing. And so we were happy to see that. And as I was doing this work, I realized that there was a potential problem. We were helping people to create wealth, but we weren't necessarily seeing discipleship going on in the lives of our business people that we were equipping to do business God's way. And the reason was because we were doing this discipleship and we were sending them out to be ministers in the marketplace, but the church was not engaged. And so they would go out and they would do their work, and they were very busy, and it was difficult to get them to come back for ongoing discipleship. And then somebody said these words to me. They said, "Be careful you're not fattening people's bellies on the way to hell." Be careful you're not fattening people's bellies on their way to hell. And that made me stop and think. I thought, that's not a good thing to do. We want to be building capacity, right? We believe that wealth creation is a good and godly thing. But what happens often when we create wealth is we forget who God is. And that's what we've seen in North America. That's what we've seen in Europe. And it's one of the challenges that we have, that, you know what, I really don't need God for my daily bread because I've got food in the kitchen. I've got money in the bank. There's food in the stores. I don't really need God for my medical needs because I've got health insurance and good doctors and good medicine. I really don't need God. I've got it. And this was a big concern to me because I thought, I believe that God wants all of his children to flourish, but how do we flourish and still remember that it is God who gives us the ability to create that wealth, from Deuteronomy 8. And it was at that time that I met Dr. Walker, who was co-facilitating this class with me. You'll see him in the next session. Dr. Walker was working with a ministry that was equipping pastors and church leaders. And what we wanted to do is to kind of join forces and be able to take this work into the church more formally. And so I was invited to move to Kenya, and I began to teach at the seminary. And it was an exciting time as we began to see churches begin to apply a marketplace ministry, a discipleship for all the people in their workplace. And we'll tell you some stories about that, some research that we've done over time. And the name of the ministry is called Discipling Marketplace Leaders. This is one example of a workplace ministry or a marketplace ministry. So we'll be telling you some of our story, and hopefully it's something that as you go through this, you may see for yourself that this is something good for your church, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a member. How do we equip the saints for the work of the ministry every day of the week? For the people of God to be relevant, they must be engaged with people in every sphere of their life. And part of the problem that we see in the church today is that Sunday is kind of the church day. And we have not necessarily connected our faith with our work every day of the week. And so that is one of the things that we believe is critically important, especially as the world changes, as the church changes, the role of the church changes. We can see that in some places, Christianity is becoming irrelevant, and we believe it's because we have not applied it to every day of the week. There's a very good example of this. There was a book that was written in 1945 about the spiritual condition in England. And the book says this: "We are convinced that England will never be converted until the laity use the opportunities daily afforded by their various professions, crafts, and occupations." So this book is saying in 1945, if we don't connect our faith to our work, we're going to have a problem. And unfortunately, that problem has shown up in some places in the world. In 1945, at the time this book was written, 30% of the Church of England, of people in England, attended church. But in 2018, less than 7% attended church. And in all of Europe today, it's about 3%. And so we can see that even though it was a recommendation, it wasn't followed up on. And church began to take a narrower and more narrow role in society. And so I don't know where you are as you're listening to this course, and I don't know if you are in a pre-Christian setting or in a post-Christian setting, or if you're surrounded by churches. But one thing we do know, and that research has shown us, is that we live in a time where there's a great big sacred secular divide. And that divide is causing us to define what the church building as a place that is sacred and everything else of life that is secular. And this has created a number of problems. So failure to disciple and to make disciples, knowing to be a disciple means you carry it into every day of the week. This will lead to a generation that has no heart for God. And what we can see is the law of 3 generations. And maybe you've heard about that in some of the other courses you've taken. The law of 3 generations says this, that a first-generation believer has a whole heart for God. Recently, we were in India, and we found many people saying, "I am a first-generation Christian," and you could see that passion that they had to share this good news. That the first-generation Christian has a whole heart for God. A second-generation Christian tends to have a heart for the church and a half heart for God. And we can see that often in Africa. There's so many churches, and people are attending church, and there can be a tendency to have developed your passion for the church, but not necessarily have that whole sold-out heart for God as a first-generation Christian. And then we come to a third-generation Christian, and we might say Europe, North America is heading that way, becoming more post-Christian. And then we often have no heart for God and no heart for the church, and we want to go in our own way. And so we believe that it's critically important, and you must believe it too, that's why you're here. It's critically important that we figure out how to be disciples every day of the week, in every place and in every space. And that's what we are asking for in this course, for you to consider that. This church-based marketplace ministry class is calling on the church to unlock the potential of the people. We want you to equip the members of the church to become ministers in the marketplace by launching a marketplace ministry in your church. And this is our hope for every church. Just as you probably in your church, you have a children's ministry. You probably have a women's ministry. You probably have a youth ministry. And normally when we are teaching this, we ask, do you have a workplace ministry or a marketplace ministry? And usually we don't see hands go up. Our prayer, and we believe that God is doing this throughout the world, that in 5 years from now, when we ask that question, we'll have a lot more people raising their hands, because hopefully we will have made the case that this is something that every church needs to do, to equip all the saints for the work of the ministry every day of the week. So I want to tell you a little bit about discipling marketplace leaders, because I think that will help you fit the context of what we will be doing over our sessions together. The name of the ministry has the word discipleship in it. And I know if I asked you, are you a disciple, you would say yes. And if I asked you, are you close to graduating? Are you almost done being a disciple? You've learned what you can learn? Hopefully you'll say no, because we know that being a disciple is a lifelong commitment. This, we believe, is the part of the foundation of having a marketplace ministry in your church. Discipleship is not something you can do once a year or twice a year. We have pastors that sometimes say to us, oh, we preach on work, a couple times a year. We've got that covered. We are in the workplace every day of the week. And so discipleship has to talk about so many of those challenges and opportunities and the contexts that are there. And so this is about discipleship at the core. What do we mean when we say the word marketplace? That can sometimes be confusing for what we are talking about. When we say the word marketplace, we are talking about three main systems: the system of education, the system of government, and the system of business. So when you think about a city and a nation, and you think about those three systems, government, education, and business, that involves a lot of the major systems within a nation. And so that is what we are talking about with marketplace. And ideally, what we want to do is to be able to disciple those people in the marketplace who are Christians, who are Christ followers, to be leaders. And we want to equip them. What does it mean to be a leader, to be an ambassador, to be a saint for Jesus in my workplace? And so we call this church-based marketplace ministry. And we believe that the home for this ministry should be in the church so that we have ongoing discussions and dialogue about how to do this. We say that this is about unleashing the church. I don't know where you are, but we talk about tying up animals, and sometimes animals are tied. When they're tied for a long time and you untie them, sometimes they forget that they're free, and they just think that this is the area where I am to be. When we think about the church, we often equate our faith to the building and to what happens in the building. In some ways, we view ourselves as being tied to the building. And we believe what we want to do is to unleash the church, to untie the people of the church, to be the church every day of the week. And when that happens, we think that it's going to transform communities and it's going to change the world. Is that a big vision? It's a big vision, but it's the way God intended, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this. On your handout, you will see our logo, and our logo has the cross, and it has 3 gears on that cross. And the bottom gear is the biggest gear, and that's the gear of the church, and next to it is the gear of business, and next to that is the gear of the marketplace. Now, if you know how to drive a car, and especially if you drive a stick shift, you know that the first gear in the car is the biggest gear. It's the first gear that gets the car going in the right direction and gets you moving down the road. But you don't want to stay in first gear for the whole trip. It's high power, and that's what we believe about the church. There's high power in the church when it's gathered, and it gets us going in the right direction. But then there needs to be a transfer of that power to the second gear, and then to the third gear. And then you start cruising along and you start gaining momentum. And what we find in the marketplace and in business is that there is high speed. Things happen very quickly, but we still need that high power from the church in order to be effective in the changes that we want to make. Too often, this first gear of the church is off spinning on its own, and it has not connected itself to the gears of the business and the marketplace. And then we're frustrated with the marketplace because there's so much corruption and it's such a place of darkness. But we haven't realized that the church needs to stay connected, that these gears are meant to lock and interlock together in order to have an impact, that they have been designed by God to have an impact. And so we want to be able to bring those gears back together so that they can continue to have an impact at a larger level. We believe that wherever Christians live and work, they are to bring the fragrance of the kingdom of God. I love the verse, 2 Corinthians 2:14. Christ through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of him everywhere. Think about your favorite fragrance. A scent that I love is the smell of bread baking. When my nose smells bread baking, it tells the rest of my body to follow it and to find the source of that smell. And what we want to do is to remember that as Christians, we are to carry the fragrance of Christ. And unfortunately, there's only 2 options. You either have the fragrance of Christ or you have the fragrance of the world. And we carry that fragrance into our workplace. If you wear perfume or cologne, or a special soap, you know that when you put it on, you smell it immediately, but then pretty soon you don't notice it anymore. But other people, as you walk past them and you're around them, they can pick up on the scent of that fragrance. And that fragrance is often our attitude. And so we have to look at the attitude that we bring to our workplace. Are we being a fragrance-bearing Christian, a Christ follower in that workplace and bringing that scent? The Apostle Paul reminds us that as apprentices of Jesus, we are to have the fragrance of Christ, and the attitudes that we wear in our workplace should remind others of Jesus. So we don't leave the building on Sunday and leave that fragrance there and say, goodbye, Jesus, I'll see you next week, and I'll miss you. We carry it with us, and we've been equipped to take that scent and to put that scent on and to be bathed in it so that we can carry it with us to these other places that we have been given the privilege to serve, our spheres of influence. Discipling Marketplace Leaders is a ministry that started in Africa, and that's just important for you to know because it may shape some of the things that you hear from us. And it's now being exported to other parts of the world, which is exciting for us. But that's a perspective that you will hear from us, and some of our stories are going to become predominantly from Africa. But we are so thankful that God is bringing this message to other places as well as in the world as you listen. But the other thing we want to remind you is that this is not a new truth, and this is not a hidden truth. This is not a truth that's been revealed to just a few people who have been privileged to hear this message. No, absolutely not. We believe that this is a forgotten truth. It's a forgotten truth from Genesis 1 and 2, and so you'll hear us spending a lot of time on Genesis 1 and 2. It's a forgotten truth that we have in our effort to fulfill the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. We have forgotten our purpose for our creation, and so that's what we want to spend some time on. We can see over the centuries in church history that there's been times where faith and work came together very well, but then it separated again. And then it came together very well, then it separated again. And when we ask why is that, we believe it's because we have not woven the work of the workplace, the marketplace, into the fabric of the church. We have kept it separately. And so we want to think about how can we do this? And it will require a paradigm shift for us as we go through this. This need for a paradigm shift becomes apparent when we ask the following three questions. And so I'm going to ask you these questions, and I want you to have a discussion yourselves about your own context in your own church and what that looks like. And we get some very interesting answers to some of these questions. But the first question is this, and it's in your notes. What % of the adults in your church are involved in the marketplace, remembering that we define the marketplace as business, government, and education? So think about the adults in your church. What % are involved in those three areas? When we ask people, typically they say 85, 95, 99%. It's the majority of the adults in our churches, the adult members in our church. So that's great. Maybe you have a lot of unemployed or a lot of seniors, so that number might be a little bit lower. But on average, we see 85 to 99%. The second question that we ask is, how does the church view business and business people? What is the perspective of the church? Now, we're not talking about your church per se, but the church in your country, the global church, let's say. What is the perception of the church toward business and business people? And I hope you have some of these discussions. But what we often tend to hear is that the church often views business people as lovers of money, as corrupt, especially if they're successful, as having no time for God. They don't have time for spiritual things. They may be viewed as secular. And so what happens is when you have the majority of the adults in your church in the marketplace, and the church has a very negative perception, we begin to see that there is a bit of a barrier. The last question we ask is, how do business people view the church? How do business people view the church? And that's an interesting question to have. And if you don't know the answer, maybe you need to go out and do some interviewing and questioning of what is the general perception of the church by business people. And oftentimes we will hear that business people view the church as a number of needy people, as beggars. They're always looking for money. It's where the poor go because they are looking for a miracle. It's not for me. Once I'm successful, I don't need the church anymore. We also hear business people say that the church is a place that just wastes our time. They demand so much of our time. They don't respect what we do. It's a time waster, and there's a lot of pressure for us to be there in multiple days during the week. The point of this is that if these are realities in your situation, we have a bit of a problem. We have to figure out how to bridge this immense gap that is there between our members in the marketplace and the way we view church and the way we define church. We sometimes say that business people communicate that they feel like the church treats them like an ATM. Now, in English, we say that that's an automatic teller machine. It's a place where you go in and you put your card and you make a cash withdrawal. You don't have a relationship with an ATM. You don't say to the ATM, where did you get the money from? How are you doing today? You make your withdrawal and you go about your business. And often business people will say that's how we feel that the church treats us. But we like to go a little bit further, and we like to say that an ATM can also stand for an appendix to mission. An appendix to mission. Think about a book that you have in your home. Often at the back of the book, there's something called an appendix. And an appendix is where we go if we want more support for what we're reading in the rest of the book. So it's a case that we go to if we don't have the full story there, we need to get extra support. We go to this appendix. And so business people often feel like they are only in the church. The mission of God has them only in the church as support for the real story. For the real story is that of missionaries and of pastors and of others. And what we want to say is that business people are not an appendix to the mission of the church. They are the mission of the church. And we want to look at that in Genesis 1 and 2. To be able to communicate that our purpose for creation was to take the things that God has given us and to help them to flourish and to multiply and help this world to flourish. And so we want to be able to try to change that narrative, and that takes a big paradigm shift. I remember in one country that we were in, the business people were especially angry with pastors, and they said, we feel like the pastors treat us like milking cows. As long as we show up on Sunday ready to be milked, that's great. But if we do not come in with the milk, they are not happy. And they don't often ask where we are sleeping, where we are eating, where we are getting this milk from. And so those are some barriers that we face. And we just want to acknowledge that this is a global issue. This is an issue that is taking place in every country, in every denomination that we have seen. It's a challenge, and it's something that we believe we have the opportunity to overcome. In 1975, John Stott and Billy Graham got together to talk about the social challenges in the world and saying that the church needs to address these social challenges as one, with one voice. And so they launched the Lausanne movement. And today it has 150 countries, the churches from 150 countries participating in the Lausanne movement. And they've been coming up with some great proclamations and mandates for the global church as it relates to different challenges. But in 2004, the Lausanne movement looked at business as mission. And they looked at the call and the role and the potential of business as mission as it relates to the church. And they made two recommendations, just two, which I love. Very nice and simple, easy to remember. The first recommendation said this, and it's in your notes, you can follow along. We call upon the church worldwide to identify, affirm, pray for, commission, and release business people and entrepreneurs to exercise their gifts and calling as business people in the world among all peoples and to the ends of the earth. So the first recommendation is for the church to identify, to pray for, to commission and release business people. The second recommendation was for business people then to receive that calling, to receive this mantle, this opportunity from the church to see that their work is a calling and to live out their gifts and their talents in order to meet the world's needs, both spiritually and physically, through business as mission. And so that's an exciting thing for us as we think about this, that the first step is by the church, the second step then is by business people. And so we want to continue to talk about what does that look like? What does that look like in your particular church? What does that look like in your particular setting? How do we equip and identify and affirm and commission business people to recognize that their gifts are not there just to support the work of what goes on in the building, but is there to support the world flourishing and people flourishing in creation, in every place and in every space. And so we're very excited to take you through our time together. We will be looking at a number of different topics. Today, we are just giving you the introduction. Then we will start looking more closely at the biblical, the theological foundation for why we believe marketplace ministry is something that the church should have. From there, we will begin looking at understanding the God of business in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And you may be very surprised to see how much of business is in and through our scriptures. And then we want to look at the need for reconciliation. Once we know and understand how God intended to have business fit into his overall plan, we have to know that things aren't really working the way it was intended. And so how do we engage ourselves in that reconciliation that needs to happen? And from there, we want to be able to look at a way forward. What would this look like for you and for your church? Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a member, whether you're in business and education and government, whatever sphere or workplace that you have, what does it look like for you to understand that work can be an act of worship? And that's something that we want to explore, and we look forward to exploring that with you over our sessions together. So again, so thankful for you tuning in with us and joining us for this class. We just pray for you and ask for God to bless this time together. And I really encourage you to have these conversations after to talk about what does this look like in your own setting, in your own church, and what are some of the barriers, but as well as the opportunities that are there to be the church every day of the week. Let's pray. Father, you are such a good God, and we love you, and we are so thankful that you have called each of us to be part of your work and part of the journey that you have given us to help this world flourish. Father, thank you for giving us talents and treasure and time so that we can use it for you in a way that brings glory and honor to you, that builds your church so that people will come to know you. Thank you for all the different work that is represented by those who are listening, whether they are farmers, whether they are working in construction, whether they are working in so many different fields and trades and crafts. Father, thank you for each of their gifts and talents. And Father, as we discuss your word together and we look at the role of our work from your perspective, I pray that you continue to release each person and their imagination to see how it is that you are calling them to be part of the answer to the challenges that this world faced in and through their work. Thank you for this time together, Father, and as we go from this conversation, Father, I pray that you help us to continue to ponder and consider what your call is for each of us in light of this. In your name we pray and believe. Amen.